Hi, Jennifer.
Oh, hey.
How are you?
Good, how are you? Oh, hey. Ali, hi.
Hi, how are you doing?
Good, how are you?
Fine, thank you.
So nice to finally eat together. I know we don't work in the same department, so it's good to be together.
Nice. Thanks for asking us.
Yeah, sorry you don't have any food, but we'll keep eating.
That's okay.
Yeah, what were we... Well, so as you guys know, I'm doing my Master's in International Education with the SIT Graduate Institute, and I've just been thinking about all of these topics lately, and I just don't know, can we talk about it a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. What is one of the most current important issues in international education?
That's a great question, Alice. Definitely the most important issue that I keep hearing about in all of the articles I'm reading about international education is the rise of information communication technologies, ICTs, in agriculture, and especially with the focus on women and youth in Africa. So my interest is definitely in Africa, and so that can mean cell phones, radio, tablets, e-readers, computers, anything that things like that.
I see.
That's very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to ask you, why do you have an interest in these issues?
So I think of two women why this issue is important to me personally. And I think they're both in Mali. One is my host mom, Annie, who represents a population of women who are literate in the local language. She's a health relay, she's married, she has children, and she has a cell phone, and she uses it to communicate with the market town, to maybe find prices of foodstuffs. So that's an interesting aspect for agriculture. She also uses it to be in touch with family. She can receive text messages and read them when they're in Bambara. And then I think of a friend's host grandmother, who is a 70-year-old woman. She's illiterate, but she still has a cell phone and uses it to communicate with friends and family. And both of those make me think as well of a recent project in Mali during the elections they had last week and that they'll be having again tomorrow, where it's called SOS Democracy, funded by USAID, and they opened a phone line where people could call in or just call in, hang up, and they would get called back to report acts of corruption, to make sure that the process is more transparent. So that's just an example in governance. I think there are a lot of opportunities in other sectors to use similar technologies.
Okay. Why is it important to the field of international education?
Oh, that's a great question. It's important because it's at the root, really, of international education. Instead of international education really focusing, in my mind, as sometimes I think about it, on the elite, on exchanges, on bringing perhaps African students to the U.S., which I think is superb. This really, using this technology, gets to local populations at all levels, at villages, towns, cities, and I think it really is an opportunity to not only for people in villages to receive information about perhaps improving practices of things they've been doing for centuries and ways to do it better, but also for people here in the U.S. to learn more about how we could do things better. So one example I'm thinking of is the desertification in the Sahel, and some of the ways that people have been combating it are reminiscent of when we had a drought here in the U.S. In the 70s in the Midwest, and things that people are doing, how they're planting trees. Those are ways that we could have prevented, techniques that we could use here still. Yeah.
Interesting. So how do you feel about these technologies in international education? What's your opinion sort of on the topic?
Well, I feel conflicted because on the one hand, I think this is great, it's exciting. We have more and more smartphones, tablets. Here in the US, it's still a new thing for a lot of Americans. I don't have a tablet, but it'd be great to have an e-reader, and I think it represents too an opportunity for, I imagine, an African child in a village somewhere, anywhere around the world, who has an entire library at the tip of their fingers with an e-reader, whereas before it's just so cost prohibitive to buy books, get them to Village, for them to actually last and not disintegrate with the conditions. So I think that is exciting. I think at the same time, I'm cautiously optimistic because these technologies on the one hand are exciting, and I think they have a great chance to reach a really large market in sharing information and finding new ways to develop international education approaches at all levels. I'm cautiously optimistic because I fear the parachute technology perspective or perhaps approach of when things like e-readers and smartphones and tablets are dropped in and they're not sustainable. While they are cheap relatively, they're not really cheap. Someone in Village perhaps couldn't spend $150 or $200 on an e-reader or even a smartphone. And what happens when it breaks? And so these issues are things that I'm thinking about, and at the root of it all is just remembering that countries in Africa and the people who live in those countries are not experiments. And these ideas need to be really thought out, and the reason behind these international education approaches with information and communication technologies in Africa, with agriculture and women or in youth, need to be responding to local issues that are raised and approached in a way that's sustainable and incorporating local ideas. So again, it's great eating with you. Let's finish this lunch maybe, and I'd love to get together again and hear more about your ideas for hot and interesting issues in international education.
Of course.
Of course.
Thank you.
Thank you. Back to the grindstone, into our different departments.
Yeah.
Let's go.
See you at the water cooler.
Yeah.
Allez,
Stole that one.
Yeah, I got it.
yeah.